This session talks about diversity competent teaching, in which we propose a new model of diversity competent teaching for primary schools and secondary schools to look at the range of diversity sources that we have in the classroom. So why do you think this is important to reconsider the approaches of teachers for working with the diverse students in their classroom?
Okay, well, for a long, long time I've been involved in internationalization of education, and I've come through the work of my PhD students in the last few years, I've come to the realization that that only deals with one type of diversity, namely national or ethnic, if you like. So, as I started looking at this, and let me just say why I've made this shift, I looked at some tests of intercultural competence. In particular, the multicultural personality questionnaire that was developed in Groningen, and I've looked at Early and Ang's work on cultural intelligence. And what I found is that if you look at the short form of the MPQ, that in fact the questions that they say are about cultural empathy, and they're the only ones about where the word culture is used, that in fact they're just about the empathic ability and not so much about culture. And the other items of the MPQ, flexibility, emotional stability, open-mindedness, social initiative, the other factors, just deal with how you interact with other people. So my thesis is now that the MPQ might also predict if someone is very good at working with diverse others, regardless of the source of diversity. And the CQ, the cultural intelligence instrument, if you remove the bit about cognitive cultural intelligence, so the knowledge about it, the other ones, motivational, behavioral, metacognitive aspects, they are also culture independent. Culture in the sense of our, what we think of first, of ethnic national cultures.
Right. So that shows that we need to look beyond the cultural aspect of diversity in education a bit more. And also, I guess, related to the cognitive aspect that teachers very much focus on, like cognitive ability and ability levels in the group, that they also need to become aware of how that impacts their contribution to group work, for instance. So that students, if they work together, that they also make use of other sources of diversity, or rather than only the cultural aspect and their cognitive ability.
Exactly. And in a way, I think there are so many more opportunities if you look at diversity in a broader way. If you utilize, let's say you're in a village school, there'll be kids from the village and there'll be kids from the farms surrounding the village. They already have a different life experience and gives you as a teacher a chance to zoom in on that sort of source of diversity.
Right. So that's another approach to working with different students than the inclusive approach that we talk about often in education. And I think we also kind of recognize the shift from internationalization activities of schools, that they become more aware of the nationalities that are part of the cohort of students, and that now that they really notice that all the other sources of diversity can also be beneficial for students' learning. And also related to inclusive education, that is of course a big topic in education worldwide, but that is also very much limited to the cognitive abilities of students. So we're kind of aiming towards a more multicultural, all-inclusive multicultural approach, and that diversity will then be showing the range of all the sources in the classroom, not only from the students' perspectives. I think that's also good to highlight that we're really looking at the cognitive repertoire of the teacher as well, and all the sources that are part of the teacher identity. So related to motivation of the teacher, why at first they want to work with diverse students, but also their norms and values, their approaches that they're using to working with them in the classroom. That need to be considered as well. And then you have this classroom filled with, on the one hand, all the students coming from various places, having their own expertise, interests, etc., combined with the one of the teacher. And that mix leads to a wonderful opportunity for utilizing all those differences and to create diversity bonus. That is a concept that we would really like to highlight, that instead of trying to overcome the challenges that come with diversity, that teachers want to utilize it, celebrate the range of diversity that they're having in the school and on classroom level as well, and create that diversity bonus.
I thought about a little scale, which starts with I ignore all the differences, I don't see them, or I say, look, at the basis we're all human. You could, in terms of seeing differences, that would be colorblind. Mm-hmm. Or you could say, well, no, sorry, the majority here rules, so you'll just have to assimilate and adopt our culture and our way of thinking and our way of doing. Or, and you mentioned that word, you could go for multiculturalism, where culture, not in a sense of ethnic national, but more in a sense of, as Geert Hofstede has defined it, as a collective programming of the mind of a group or category of people that makes them different from others. And the other day I heard Richard Lewis, the author of When Cultures Collide, and he said, well, culture, my definition is, that's the way we do things around here. Which, you know, it says the same thing. It's not necessarily connected to national or ethnic culture, but any group or any category of people that have their own symbols and way of communicating, etc., that make up multiculturalism.
Right. It's kind of the atmosphere that you create. That is what Lewis defines as culture, right? It's kind of the dynamic that you're having in a group based on that cognitive repertoire of the teacher and the students on the other side.
You mentioned diversity bonus, and I've got a little video that I'd like to show you about explaining Scott Page's book on diversity. It's an excellent book, but you know, we have limited time and I can't go reading this book, or let's just summarize it with a little video. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to take a couple of minutes of your time to explain what Scott Page meant with diversity bonus. What is it and when can it arise? I'm going to introduce you to three people who have different abilities designated with letters. We have Amanda, we have Adam and Claire with 5, 4 and 3 abilities. What happens if I put these into teams? If I combine Adam and Amanda and Adam with Claire? You can see that as team abilities, Team AA has 6 and Team AC has 7 abilities. Now, if all abilities were relevant for a particular complex task and the team members were able to apply these abilities, Team AC would be better at achieving the task than Team AA, as they have more abilities. In his book, Scott Page defined for his purposes diversity as being cognitive diversity, differences in how we interpret, reason and solve. But I want to start initially with a wider definition that includes psychomotor abilities. I want you to think back about the time you were in primary school. In particular, I want you to think back about the time that you were doing competitive sports and how would the teacher organize this? Quite commonly, the teacher will point to 2 pupils and say, please select your teams, one about. And initially, you might do this by picking your friends, the most popular kids in class. It never felt good to be the last one to be picked. After a while though, you might start to select particular classmates because they're a good goalie, they're a good attacker, they're a good defender, because the task was quite simple. The task was to win the game. Now, no teacher would have ever stopped and told you that you just had your first lesson in diversity management, where on the basis of some characteristics that initially you didn't know and characteristics that you can't see just by looking at people, you end up picking people with a diversity of skills to be able to achieve a common task, to win the game.
So what you see in the video is that students are having an assigned task, so they need to win the match. That's basically the purpose, right? So they have a clear task in mind that they need to complete as a group. And that is adding to this conversation, that if we want to design our education in a way that is really beneficial for all students, you really need to think about how the task could be designed so that all students can contribute to that in their own unique manner. That is what we mean with task relevance. And I said it already before that should have a very clear place in the classroom, that you also need to critically look at how you formulate your task and formulate your assignments so that students can really have their own say in the assignment, so that it becomes very personal learning.
Charlie, who never gets picked in a game of soccer, right, starts to maybe become even a bit disenfranchised, but he's a computer nerd. So as a teacher, I think it's important I let Charlie shine at a certain point with his particular skills and expertise. The task relevance we talk about is relevant to the diversity that you wish to address. And if you flip that around, I've got a group of students, what diversity is available for me to set a task that addresses these diversities.
Right. That requires skills and competencies of the teacher, of course. So if we look at the intercultural teaching competence model, we notice that there are different layers of teacher abilities to work with diversity. So the first level is the foundational level of competency, and that is kind of setting the scene for working with diverse others, making sure that also your classroom layout and the physical environment is kind of suitable for the learning activities that you are designing. And it's also becoming aware of your own identity. So what is your cognitive repertoire? What are your norms and values? And how is that different from the ones that the students have in your classroom? Building on that, you have the second layer, which is facilitating group discussions, having classroom talks about, sometimes critical issues or things that are very recent and relevant for the students. Sometimes they bring in a topic to the classroom, and it is very important for you that you can then react on that in an appropriate manner. So that facilitation level of competency is kind of the next step, so that you are able to guide students, so that you also stimulate them to have group discussions without you.
Actually, I've got a question about that.
All right.
These facilitation competences. Is it also not about facilitating when you have people from different cultures, whatever they might be, to achieve the same learning effect?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, so you need to kind of work around the task sometimes to stimulate their learning and to have the learning targets in mind, so that you can design that in a way that suits the learning preferences of the students in class. And that kind of relates to the highest level of competencies already, which is the curriculum design competencies. So that you critically look at the sources that you're using in class, that you really select the sources that are beneficial for the students and that they can also identify themselves with. So that might be cultural material from, various sources, and that you look for reliable, suitable resources for in your classroom. And not only the materials that you're always using in your lessons and that you're used to and that you're doing for years already, but that might need some changes here and there so that it is more suitable for the students that you work with.
Yeah, let us get on to another hobby horse of mine, which is this continuous learning line. In my humble opinion, I think children at the age of 6, you can have much more influence on their attitude to something than someone who's 18 or 19. And if I look at a continuous learning line, let's call it embracing diversity, and whether that's national, ethnic or other forms of diversity, but embracing diversity to the supreme level of creating a diversity bonus, I think we need to build slowly and give pupils the chance to reflect which teacher do you know has ever said after a game of sports or after 3 or 4, now why do we have this hierarchy of selection in the class? Why did this happen? Or when they make teams to do a project and it requires a drawing, why did you all invite someone who can draw really well to sort of just reflect on that and give pupils a chance to start to really reflectively appreciate the benefits of diversity?
Yeah.
Because we're getting them at 18, 19 in higher education, and just the other day at the conference I called it the great repair action. We have to catch up on making them appreciate diversity when they've already had 12 years of education in which this could be really fine-tuned and honed to a really great skill. Now in this knowledge economy that we have, it's of course a lot about the cognitive diversity, and we need to look at how do these different sources of diversity contribute to cognitive diversity. Now for our model, we thought it was good to use the model of Mello and Wrench, looking at cognitive repertoires of people and having a layered approach. Can you say something about those layers?
I was about to, as you just said, that sometimes if we look at younger children in class, then we can still kind of influence their thinking. And but first, going back to your comment about reflection, I think in education sometimes we are always in a rush and we need to continue as we're really focused on the content sometimes. And with diversity competent teaching and creating a diversity bonus, we need to take time to really reflect on the learning, to train and develop soft skills of students to appreciate one another a bit more. So that is one. And then talking about cognitive repertoire. So again, this is kind of two-layered, as we have the levels of stability of students. So think about norms and values, also aspects of identity, and then skills that they can train over time and roles that they can take on in assignments. And that is still rather trainable in primary schools. But then moving upwards to secondary, you see that it becomes harder to influence students' thinking, and that you need more transformative learning experiences that really require students to go out of their comfort zone, to influence their thinking and to reflect on the norms and values and to develop skills that are necessary to complete the task. Even for teachers, it becomes harder, as those are adults already who have a clear understanding sometimes of how the world works and what their norms and values are and how that relates to their own aspects of their identity. So using the theory of transformative learning, in one of our studies, we worked with teachers and school leaders, and we went to South Africa to really create an impact that then triggered their own, norms and values and beliefs about life in a way that changed their behavior in a later stage. So if we want to work with teachers, if we want to let them reflect on their own teaching, but still influence their behavior, we need to create transformative learning experiences in a way that teachers are triggered to go out of their comfort zone, to really reflect on their own behavior, and then to mirror that to the diversity competent teaching model, which might be a good moment to really introduce the model to our audience.
Yeah, I think it would be nice if you explained all the features of this model now.
So this is the diversity competent teaching model that we were talking about. And as you can see, we have the upper part of this circle, which addresses all the students in the classroom. So all the different sources of diversity are shown above. And that relates to the things that we mentioned about nationality, gender, religion, cognitive ability, etc. Those students are in a school with a particular approach to diversity of a school leader and having a very clear vision and mission statement on that. So that is the influential layer factor around the inner circle of diversity competent teaching. And of course that gets affected by society, and of course also global crises really impact the way we work with our students in a school. The lower part of the circle talks about teacher behavior, And then the thing that we just mentioned about the cognitive repertoire is shown here, and how we can impact their thinking about how to behave in the classroom, and the different levels that can or are harder to influence during the years. The cognitive repertoire relates to the motivation of teachers. So what is their motivation? What drives them to really work with the students and to really think about the 3 levels of intercultural teaching that is affecting their behavior? And then from that motivation, they select an approach. And you mentioned the different types of approaches that you can think of. So from colorblindness upwards to all-inclusive multiculturalism. And I think that you can see that in a school. If you just look at the displays on the walls or think about the entrance hall of a school, you can see what kind of approach is selected to work with diversity. And everything together leads to diversity competent teaching, which is the inner circle of interaction between, on the upper half, the students and the teacher. And this is a model not seen as an assessment tool. It's rather an idea of reflecting on your own identity, reflecting on your cognitive repertoire and how that impacts your behavior in the classroom. And hopefully on team level as well, that you talk to your colleagues about this and that you as a school look at the approaches that you apparently have in your school and how that might be changed as the student population is changing as well, so that we need to respond to that in an appropriate manner.
So the model actually brings together a number of different views from authors, from components of this model. I mean, Mello and Wrench in terms of the cognitive sort of element, the cognitive repertoire. Who was it?
We have Dimitrov and Haque for
Dimitrov and Haque,
different levels of intercultural teaching, and of course theories on approaches to diversity, what comes from various theories and authors, and then motivation as one component which was really missing in existing models, that kind of the context was missing. And of course motivation is influenced by school leaders and by society and recent events that maybe motivate you a bit more suddenly to really think about the students that you have in your classroom and how to work with them. So those external factors kind of were also missing in various models, and we thought, let's combine all of that and use it as a reflection tool for educators to look at their own diversity competent behavior.
And I was talking to Richard Lewis the other week, and he's telling, I made a suggestion. I said, if we think about diversity, how can we connect it to culture? And one thought I had was, maybe if diversity drives is particularly impactful, then culture can emerge. So certain diversities cause different behaviors, even language usage, certain jargon or whatever, and slowly sort of a culture emerges because the diversity is very strong and is very impactful in many aspects of life.
Yeah, so it's definitely also influenced by the people that you work with as you create that culture together. And that goes back to the cognitive repertoire, because it is based on the terms that you're used to. It's based on, of course, your background and all the vocabulary that comes with it. So I think in collaborations, you have different cultures. So that is the culture that you have in your classroom, but that might be different than the culture that you have in your teaching team, in the culture that you create as kind of a teacher-parents partnership. That might be another culture. So looking at culture in that way, I think is very beneficial for us to reflect on your motivation and your approaches in those different settings.